The question of how to be happy is perhaps the most persistent inquiry that has haunted human consciousness since we first developed the capacity for self-reflection. And Carl Jung, one of the most profound explorers of the human psyche, spent his entire career discovering that happiness is not what most people think it is, not a constant state of pleasure or contentment, but rather a deep alignment between your conscious life and the wisdom of your unconscious mind, a harmony that can only be achieved through the courageous journey of individuation that transforms you from a collection of borrowed ideas and social expectations into an authentic expression of your unique soul. Before we embark on this transformative exploration of Jungian philosophy and its revolutionary approach to human happiness, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. And I genuinely need you to stay with me for the entire journey because Jung's insights build upon each other like a complex symphony, where each movement reveals new depths of meaning that can only be fully appreciated when experienced as a complete work of psychological wisdom. Jung discovered that the pursuit of conventional happiness, the kind promoted by society, advertising, and even well-meaning friends and family, often leads to a peculiar form of suffering that he called the neurosis of meaninglessness, where people achieve everything they thought they wanted, accumulate all the external markers of success and satisfaction, yet find themselves haunted by an inexplicable sense of emptiness, restlessness, and spiritual poverty that no amount of pleasure, achievement, or social validation can fill. This neurosis, Jung observed, is endemic in modern civilization because we have lost touch with the deeper layers of our psyche, the archetypal wisdom and instinctual guidance that evolved over millions of years to help human beings navigate not just survival, but meaning, purpose, and authentic fulfillment in harmony with the natural rhythms of growth, creativity, love, and death that govern all life on Earth. Jung's approach to happiness begins with the radical reframing of the question itself, shifting from asking, "How can I be happy?" to asking, "How can I become whole? How can I live authentically? How can I align my conscious choices with my deepest nature? And how can I serve something larger than my ego's immediate desires while still honoring my individual needs, gifts, and legitimate aspirations for love, creative expression, and meaningful contribution to the ongoing human story?" The first foundation of Jungian happiness is what he called the recognition and integration of the shadow, those aspects of your personality that you've disowned, repressed, or hidden from yourself and others because they don't fit your idealized self-image or society's expectations of who you should be. Yet these rejected parts of yourself contain enormous vitality, creativity, and authentic energy that, when consciously reclaimed and integrated, become sources of power, depth, and genuine self-acceptance that no external achievement can provide. Jung understood that most people spend tremendous energy maintaining a persona, a social mask that presents only their most acceptable qualities, while keeping their darker impulses, embarrassing desires, primitive emotions, and socially inappropriate aspects carefully hidden. And while this persona serves important social functions, when it becomes your primary identity, you lose touch with your authentic self, leading to the chronic dissatisfaction and spiritual emptiness that characterizes so much of modern life. The shadow work that Jung prescribed is not about becoming selfish, destructive, or antisocial, but about acknowledging the full spectrum of your humanity, including your capacity for anger, jealousy, sexuality, aggression, ambition, and all the other energies that civilized society teaches you to suppress. Because when these energies are unconscious, they control you from within, leaking out in passive-aggressive behavior, projection onto others, or sudden explosive episodes that damage your relationships and sabotage your goals. When you consciously recognize your shadow and learn to work with it skillfully, Jung discovered, you gain access to a tremendous source of authentic power, creative energy, and self-acceptance that allows you to engage with life more honestly, more fully, more effectively, no longer exhausted by the effort of maintaining a perfect facade or terrorized by the possibility that others might discover your human imperfections and weaknesses. The process of shadow integration involves developing what Jung called the courage of imperfection, the willingness to be seen as flawed, complex, contradictory, and thoroughly human, rather than maintaining the exhausting pretense of having transcended the messy realities of emotional life, physical needs, selfish desires, and all the other aspects of human nature that connect you to the animal kingdom and the natural world, rather than elevating you above it. Jung believed that true happiness emerges from this integration of light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, idealized self and actual self, creating what he called the transcendent function, a dynamic balance that allows you to be authentically yourself while still growing, learning, and contributing positively to your relationships and community without sacrificing your individuality on the altar of social conformity or inflating your ego through fantasies of specialness or superiority. The second foundation of Jungian happiness is the recognition and relationship with what he termed the anima and animus, the contrasexual aspects of your psyche that represent the feminine principle in men and the masculine principle in women, archetypal energies that, when unconscious, create endless projections, impossible romantic expectations, and chronic dissatisfaction in relationships, but when consciously engaged become sources of creativity, intuition, depth, and the capacity for profound intimacy with both yourself and others. Jung observed that most people project their anima or animus onto romantic partners, expecting another person to carry the qualities that they haven't developed within themselves, leading to the common pattern where initial attraction and idealization gradually gives way to disappointment, criticism, and resentment as the other person inevitably fails to live up to the impossible standard of completing your psychological wholeness through their presence in your life. The man who hasn't developed his own capacity for tenderness, receptivity, intuition, and emotional depth will unconsciously seek these qualities in women, becoming dependent on female partners to provide what he could develop within himself, while simultaneously resenting this dependence and often devaluing the very qualities he desperately needs, creating a tragic dynamic where he pushes away the love he craves because he can't tolerate his own neediness and vulnerability. Similarly, the woman who hasn't claimed her own authority, independence, logical thinking, and capacity for decisive action will project these qualities onto male partners, alternately admiring and resenting their strength, while remaining unconscious of her own potential for leadership, clear thinking, and effective engagement with the world's challenges and opportunities. Jung's path to happiness through anima and animus work involves gradually withdrawing these projections and developing within yourself the qualities you've been seeking in others, not to become androgynous or lose your natural masculine or feminine characteristics, but to become psychologically complete, capable of accessing both assertive and receptive energies, both thinking and feeling functions, both independence and intimacy as the situation requires, rather than being limited to only half of human potential. This process of intermarriage, as Jung called it, creates the foundation for genuine happiness in relationships because you're no longer desperately seeking someone else to complete you, but rather offering your wholeness in partnership with another whole person, creating the possibility for real intimacy, mutual growth, and shared adventure, rather than the codependent dynamics that characterize so many modern relationships where people use each other as psychological crutches rather than choosing each other as companions on the journey of conscious development. The development of anima and animus also opens up vast new sources of creativity, intuition, and inspiration because these contrasexual aspects of your psyche serve as bridges to the collective unconscious, the deeper layers of psyche that connect you to the wisdom, creativity, and archetypal energies that have guided human development throughout history, giving you access to resources for problem-solving, artistic expression, and innovative thinking that go beyond what your conscious mind alone can generate. Jung discovered that many of the greatest artists, inventors, and visionaries throughout history were people who had successfully integrated their contrasexual energies, allowing them to combine traditionally masculine qualities like focus, discipline, and logical analysis with traditionally feminine qualities like receptivity, intuition, and holistic perception, creating a synergy that produced breakthrough innovations, profound artistic works, and transformative contributions to human knowledge and culture. The third foundation of Jungian happiness involves understanding and working with what he called complexes, those autonomous clusters of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that operate like separate personalities within your psyche, each with its own agenda, its own emotional charge, its own way of taking over your consciousness when triggered by specific situations or relationships, turning you temporarily into someone you don't recognize or particularly like. Jung realized that everyone carries multiple complexes, some inherited from family patterns and cultural conditioning, others developed through personal trauma or significant life experiences, and while these complexes originally formed as protective mechanisms to help you survive difficult circumstances, they often outlive their usefulness and begin interfering with your ability to respond freshly and appropriately to current situations, keeping you trapped in outdated patterns that prevent growth, authentic relationship, and present moment effectiveness. The mother complex might cause you to remain psychologically dependent well into adulthood, seeking approval and caretaking from authority figures, while never developing your own capacity for self-direction and mature responsibility. Or it might swing to the opposite extreme, making you fiercely independent and rejecting of any help or support, unable to receive love or guidance, even when it would be beneficial and appropriate. The father complex might leave you constantly seeking approval from authority figures, unable to claim your own power and make independent decisions, or it might manifest as chronic rebellion against any form of structure or guidance, preventing you from learning from those who have valuable experience and wisdom to share. Jung's approach to working with complexes involves first learning to recognize when you're being taken over by one, developing the ability to notice the shift in your emotional state, thought patterns, and behavioral impulses when a complex becomes activated, and then practicing the skill of stepping back, taking a breath, and asking yourself whether your current reactions are coming from your mature, conscious self or from a wounded, protective part of your psyche that's trying to prevent old pain from happening again. This process requires developing what Jung called the observing ego, a part of yourself that can witness your own psychological processes without being completely identified with them, that can notice when you're being hijacked by a complex without immediately acting on the impulses and emotions that arise from that temporary possession, giving you space to choose how to respond rather than automatically reacting from old programming. The goal is not to eliminate complexes entirely, which Jung believed was probably impossible anyway, but to develop a conscious relationship with them, understanding their origins, their protective function, their legitimate concerns, while also recognizing their limitations, their outdated strategies, their tendency to create the very problems they're trying to solve, allowing you to honor their underlying wisdom while not being controlled by their rigid patterns. When you can work skillfully with your complexes, Jung discovered, they become valuable sources of information about your psychological needs, unhealed wounds, and areas where you need to develop greater consciousness and maturity, transforming from unconscious tyrants that hijack your behavior into conscious allies that inform your understanding of yourself and guide your continued growth and development. This complex work is essential for happiness because it frees you from the exhausting cycle of being periodically taken over by autonomous psychological forces that make you say and do things you later regret, damaging your relationships, sabotaging your goals, and creating unnecessary drama and conflict in your life. Replacing this chaotic reactivity with the steady presence and conscious choice that allow you to respond to life's challenges and opportunities from your authentic self rather than from old wounds and protective patterns. The fourth foundation of Jungian happiness is the recognition and development of what he called your individual path of individuation, the unique journey of psychological and spiritual development that leads you from unconscious identification with collective values and expectations toward conscious expression of your authentic self, your personal gifts, your individual calling, and your unique contribution to the ongoing evolution of human consciousness and culture. Jung understood that modern society's emphasis on conformity, standardization, and mass production extends to human development as well, creating pressure to follow predetermined paths to success and happiness that may be completely unsuited to your individual nature, gifts, challenges, and life purpose, leading to the soul-destroying experience of living someone else's life while your authentic self remains buried under layers of social conditioning and external expectations. The process of individuation requires tremendous courage because it means differentiating yourself from the crowd, taking responsibility for discovering who you really are beneath all the roles you've played and identities you've assumed, facing the anxiety and uncertainty that comes with forging your own path, rather than following well-established routes that others have traveled before you. This journey often begins with what Jung called the midlife crisis, though it can occur at any age when the gap between your authentic self and your lived life becomes too wide to ignore, manifesting as depression, anxiety, restlessness, relationship problems, or a general sense that your life lacks meaning and purpose despite external indicators of success and achievement. Jung saw these crisis periods not as pathological conditions to be medicated or suppressed, but as crucial opportunities for psychological and spiritual growth, moments when your unconscious is demanding attention, insisting that you stop living automatically and begin the challenging but rewarding work of discovering who you really are and what your life is truly about. The individuation process involves developing a relationship with what Jung called the self, the archetypal center of your personality that serves as the organizing principle for your psychological development. The inner compass that guides you toward wholeness, authenticity, and meaningful contribution to life, rather than mere adaptation to social expectations and collective values. This relationship with the self often manifests through dreams, synchronicities, creative inspiration, and moments of profound insight or clarity that seem to come from beyond your conscious mind, providing guidance, encouragement, and direction for your continued growth and development along the path that is uniquely yours. Jung believed that the self has an agenda for your life that goes beyond personal happiness or success, as conventionally defined, including your individual gifts and service to something larger than your ego's immediate desires, whether that's contributing to your family, community, profession, or the broader evolution of human consciousness and culture. And that true happiness emerges from aligning your conscious choices with this deeper sense of purpose and meaning. The individuation journey is not selfish or narcissistic, despite requiring you to differentiate from collective expectations, because it ultimately serves the collective by developing your unique gifts and perspectives in ways that enrich the broader human community, adding your distinctive voice to the great conversation of human experience rather than simply echoing what has been said before. Jung observed that people who successfully navigate the individuation process often become sources of inspiration, wisdom, and creative innovation for others, not because they're trying to be special or superior, but because they've developed the courage to be authentically themselves, to express their genuine thoughts and feelings, to pursue their real interests and callings, to contribute their actual gifts, rather than performing roles that others expect them to play. This authentic self-expression is deeply attractive to others because it gives them permission to be real as well, creating a ripple effect of increased authenticity, creativity, and aliveness in families, workplaces, and communities where individuated people share their genuine selves rather than maintaining carefully constructed personas designed to gain approval or avoid rejection. The fifth foundation of Jungian happiness involves understanding and working with what he called the transcendent function, the psychological capacity that allows you to hold the tension between opposing forces within yourself and your life situation until a new creative solution emerges that transcends the original conflict, transforming either-or thinking into both and integration that honors the legitimate needs and perspectives on all sides of internal or external conflicts. Jung discovered that most psychological suffering comes from trying to eliminate one side of a natural tension or polarity, attempting to be all light without shadow, all spiritual without acknowledging material needs, all rational without honoring emotional wisdom, creating an artificial split that impoverishes your experience and effectiveness while generating chronic internal conflict and external relationship problems. The transcendent function operates like a psychological alchemical process, taking the raw materials of internal conflict, external challenge, and apparent contradiction, and through patient attention, conscious reflection, and creative engagement, transforming them into new possibilities, innovative solutions, and expanded ways of being that weren't available when you were trapped in either-or thinking and trying to choose sides in what may actually be false dichotomies. This process requires developing what Jung called the capacity to hold tension, the psychological strength to remain present with uncomfortable feelings, conflicting desires, competing loyalties, and apparent contradictions without immediately rushing to resolve them through premature action, defensive reactions, or simplistic thinking that reduces complex realities to manageable but ultimately inadequate formulas. The transcendent function often manifests through creative activities, like art, music, writing, dance, or other forms of expression that allow unconscious contents to emerge and interact with conscious awareness in ways that generate new insights, perspectives, and possibilities that couldn't be reached through rational analysis alone, which is why Jung strongly encouraged his patients to engage in active imagination, dream work, and creative pursuits as essential components of psychological healing and development. When you learn to work skillfully with the transcendent function, Jung observed, you develop what he called the creative attitude toward life, approaching challenges and opportunities not as problems to be solved through willpower and rational planning alone, but as invitations to discover new aspects of yourself, new ways of being, new possibilities for growth and contribution that emerge from the dynamic interaction between conscious intention and unconscious wisdom. This creative attitude transforms your relationship to difficulty, uncertainty, and change from one of resistance and anxiety to one of curiosity and engagement, allowing you to see obstacles as opportunities for development, conflicts as chances for greater understanding, and crises as gateways to new levels of consciousness and effectiveness that weren't accessible when life was comfortable and predictable. The development of the transcendent function also enhances your capacity for genuine relationship with others because you become less threatened by difference, disagreement, and conflict, more able to hold space for multiple perspectives, more skilled at finding creative solutions that honor everyone's legitimate needs, rather than insisting on win-lose outcomes that damage trust and connection. Jung believed that the transcendent function is not only crucial for individual happiness and development, but also essential for collective healing and evolution, because the complex challenges facing humanity require solutions that transcend traditional either-or thinking, that integrate apparently opposing perspectives and interests, that generate innovative approaches to ancient problems like conflict, inequality, environmental destruction, and the persistent
human tendency to create in-groups and out-groups that justify treating some people as less worthy of respect, consideration, and care than others. The sixth foundation of Jungian happiness involves developing what he called a living relationship with the numinous, those experiences of the sacred, the transcendent, the mysteriously meaningful that connect you to something larger than your individual existence, while simultaneously affirming your unique place and purpose within the greater whole of existence. Jung understood that humans are inherently religious beings, not necessarily in the sense of believing in particular doctrines or belonging to specific institutions, but in the deeper sense of needing connection to mystery, meaning, and transcendence, needing to feel that your life matters in some ultimate sense, that your existence serves purposes beyond mere survival and pleasure, that you're participating in something sacred and meaningful that extends beyond the boundaries of your individual biography. The absence of this numinous connection, Jung observed, is one of the primary causes of modern neurosis and depression, because when life becomes purely secular, materialistic, and focused on immediate gratification or ego achievement, people lose touch with the sense of wonder, reverence, and sacred purpose that gives meaning to suffering, motivation for growth, and context for individual existence within the broader patterns of cosmic evolution. Jung's approach to the numinous was deeply personal and experiential, rather than dogmatic or institutional, encouraging people to pay attention to their own experiences of the sacred through dreams, synchronicities, encounters with nature, moments of profound beauty or insight, creative inspiration, and those mysterious experiences that seem to come from beyond ordinary consciousness, yet feel more real and meaningful than everyday reality. He believed that these numinous experiences are not supernatural interruptions of natural law, but natural expressions of the deeper layers of psyche and cosmos that are normally hidden from ordinary consciousness. Glimpses of the underlying unity, intelligence, and creative principle that manifest through the apparent chaos and randomness of surface events, providing guidance, encouragement, and perspective that help you navigate life's challenges while maintaining connection to purpose and meaning. The development of a living relationship with the numinous doesn't require abandoning rational thinking or critical intelligence, Jung emphasized, but rather expanding your understanding of reality to include dimensions that can't be measured or manipulated, but can be experienced, honored, and allowed to inform your choices and attitudes in ways that enrich your life with depth, meaning, and connection to the sacred aspects of existence that every human culture throughout history has recognized and celebrated in various forms. This numinous connection often manifests through what Jung called the religious attitude, not adherence to specific beliefs or practices, but a fundamental orientation of reverence, humility, and openness to mystery that allows you to approach life as sacred, to treat yourself and others as expressions of something holy, to engage with your work and relationships as opportunities for serving something greater than your ego's immediate desires, while still honoring your individual needs and legitimate aspirations. Jung discovered that people who cultivate this living relationship with the numinous often report a profound sense of guidance, support, and meaning that sustains them through difficulties and enhances their joy during positive experiences. Not because they're escaping from reality into fantasy, but because they're opening to deeper dimensions of reality that provide context, perspective, and resources for navigating the full spectrum of human experience with wisdom, courage, and compassion. The seventh foundation of Jungian happiness involves understanding and embracing what he called the process of psychological death and rebirth that characterizes all genuine growth and transformation. Recognizing that becoming truly happy requires letting go of outdated versions of yourself, relationships, and life circumstances that no longer serve your development, even when this letting go feels like loss, grief, and disorientation that challenges your sense of identity and security. Jung observed that most people resist change, even when their current situation is unsatisfying, because the known discomfort feels safer than the unknown possibilities that change might bring, leading to psychological stagnation, where people remain trapped in patterns, relationships, and circumstances that limit their growth and authentic expression while complaining about their lack of fulfillment without taking the necessary risks to create something different. The death and rebirth process that Jung described is not a one-time event, but a recurring pattern throughout the lifespan, requiring periodic shedding of identities, roles, relationships, beliefs, and ways of being that have served their purpose but now constrain your continued development. Making space for new aspects of yourself to emerge, new relationships to form, new possibilities to manifest that couldn't coexist with the old patterns you were maintaining. This process often begins with what Jung called the dark night of the soul, periods of depression, confusion, loss, or crisis, where your familiar ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving no longer work effectively, where your usual sources of meaning and satisfaction seem empty or hollow, where you feel lost, disconnected, or unclear about who you are and what your life is about. Experiences that, while deeply uncomfortable, are actually signs that you're ready for the next stage of your psychological and spiritual development. Jung understood these dark periods not as pathological conditions requiring immediate relief, but as necessary transitions that, when navigated with patience, courage, and appropriate support, lead to expanded consciousness, deeper authenticity, greater effectiveness, and more sustainable happiness than was possible at previous stages of development, like the darkness of the cocoon that precedes the butterfly's emergence into flight. The key to working skillfully with death and rebirth cycles is developing what Jung called faith in the process. Trust that your psyche has its own wisdom and timing for growth and transformation, that the uncomfortable feelings and disorienting experiences of transition serve important functions in breaking down outdated structures and preparing ground for new growth, even when you can't see where the process is leading or understand why certain losses and difficulties are necessary. This faith is not passive resignation, but active participation in your own transformation, willingness to examine your patterns and beliefs, to feel your feelings fully without numbing or avoiding them, to stay open to new possibilities while grieving what you're leaving behind, to seek support and guidance while ultimately trusting your own inner wisdom and the natural intelligence of your psyche to guide you through the transition toward greater wholeness and authentic expression. Jung believed that people who learn to navigate death and rebirth cycles skillfully develop what he called psychological resilience.
The capacity to weather life's inevitable changes, losses, and challenges without being destroyed by them, but rather using them as opportunities for growth, deeper understanding, and expanded capacity for love, creativity, and meaningful contribution to life. This resilience is not about becoming hard or emotionally numb, but about developing the inner resources, support systems, and spiritual perspectives that allow you to remain open and responsive to life while maintaining your essential core identity and values, even as your external circumstances and internal experiences undergo sometimes dramatic transformations. The eighth foundation of Jungian happiness involves cultivating what he called the attitude of active patience, the capacity to work diligently toward your goals and desires while simultaneously accepting that the most important outcomes are not under your direct control, that your ego's timeline and agenda may not align with the deeper patterns and rhythms that govern psychological development, creative expression, and the manifestation of meaningful opportunities and relationships. Jung observed that much modern suffering comes from what he termed the tyranny of the ego, the unconscious belief that your conscious mind should be able to determine and control all aspects of your experience, that happiness depends on getting what you want when you want it, that frustration and delay are signs that something is wrong, rather than natural aspects of any creative process, whether you're creating art, building relationships, developing skills, or bringing new possibilities into manifestation. Active patience combines the masculine principle of focused effort and clear intention with the feminine principle of receptivity and trust in natural timing, allowing you to work wholeheartedly toward your goals while remaining open to unexpected opportunities, alternative paths, and outcomes that may be different from, but potentially better than what your conscious mind originally envisioned. This attitude requires developing what Jung called differentiated consciousness, the ability to distinguish between what is genuinely within your control and what isn't, focusing your energy and attention on your choices, efforts, and responses while releasing attachment to specific outcomes, timing, and other people's reactions, creating a dynamic balance between agency and surrender that maximizes both your effectiveness and your peace of mind. The practice of active patience often reveals that your ego's urgency and impatience actually interfere with the natural processes that bring about the results you desire, like trying to force a flower to bloom faster by pulling on its petals, and that when you align your efforts with natural rhythms and timing, things often unfold more smoothly and successfully than when you're pushing against the current or trying to micromanage every detail of complex processes that involve many variables beyond your direct influence. Jung discovered that this attitude of active patience is particularly important in relationships where your desire for connection, understanding, and intimacy must be balanced with respect for the other person's autonomy, timing, and developmental process, allowing love to grow naturally rather than trying to force intimacy through manipulation, pressure, or expectations that create resistance and distance rather than the closeness you actually want. The development of active patience also enhances your creative work because it allows you to persist through the inevitable periods of frustration, confusion, and apparent lack of progress that characterize any significant creative endeavor, trusting that your continued efforts are contributing to invisible processes of incubation and development that will eventually produce the insights, breakthroughs, or finished works that couldn't be rushed or forced through willpower alone. Jung believed that active patience is a sign of psychological maturity and spiritual wisdom because it reflects acceptance of your place in the larger web of existence, recognition that you're part of complex systems and processes that operate according to their own intelligence and timing, and faith that when you align your efforts with these deeper patterns rather than fighting against them, life becomes both more effective and more enjoyable. The ninth foundation of Jungian happiness involves developing what he called conscious relationship with your body, your instincts, and the natural world, recognizing that happiness requires not just psychological and spiritual development, but also honoring your physical needs, biological rhythms, and connection to the earth and its creatures as essential aspects of wholeness and well-being that modern civilization often ignores or actively suppresses. Jung understood that the mind-body split that characterizes much of Western culture is a false dichotomy that impoverishes human experience and contributes to many forms of physical illness, emotional distress, and spiritual alienation. Because you are not a mind that happens to have a body, but rather an embodied consciousness whose thoughts, feelings, and spiritual experiences are intimately connected to your physical health, energy levels, and relationship with the natural environment that sustains all life on Earth. The development of body consciousness involves learning to listen to your physical sensations, energy levels, and instinctual responses as sources of important information about your psychological state, your relationships, your work situation, and your overall alignment with your authentic nature and deepest values, rather than treating your body as a machine that should perform according to your ego's demands, regardless of what it needs for health, restoration, and optimal functioning. This somatic awareness often reveals that many emotional problems, relationship difficulties, and creative blocks have physical components that need attention, whether through changes in diet, exercise, sleep patterns, or environmental factors, and that psychological insights and spiritual practices are most effective when combined with practical attention to your body's needs for nourishment, movement, rest, and connection to natural rhythms and cycles. Jung also emphasized the importance of what he called instinctual wisdom, the deep knowing that emerges from millions of years of evolutionary development and often manifests as gut feelings, intuitive responses, and bodily sensations that provide guidance about people, situations, and choices that your rational mind might not be able to analyze, but your organism can assess through subtle cues, energy patterns, and unconscious recognition of safety, compatibility, or potential threat. Learning to trust and integrate your instinctual responses with your rational analysis and conscious values creates a more complete and effective approach to decision-making that honors both your intellectual understanding and your biological wisdom, leading to choices that support your overall well-being rather than serving only your ego's immediate desires or society's expectations. The connection to nature that Jung advocated is not just aesthetic appreciation or occasional outdoor recreation, but a fundamental recognition of your belonging to the natural world, your dependence on healthy ecosystems, your responsibility to live in ways that support rather than destroy the web of life that makes your existence possible, and your need for regular contact with natural beauty, wildness, and the seasonal cycles that remind you of the larger patterns and rhythms that govern all existence. Jung believed that much modern depression, anxiety, and sense of meaninglessness stems from disconnection from these natural patterns and rhythms, from living in artificial environments that insulate you from weather, seasons, plants, animals, and the daily cycles of light and darkness that your body and psyche evolved to recognize and respond to, creating a form of ecological alienation that contributes to psychological distress and spiritual emptiness. The practice of conscious embodiment and nature connection doesn't require abandoning modern life or returning to some idealized past, but rather finding ways to honor your physical needs and maintain meaningful connection to natural rhythms within whatever circumstances you currently inhabit, whether through gardening, hiking, swimming, dancing, yoga, martial arts, or simply spending time outdoors observing the sky, trees, birds, and changing seasons that continue their ancient patterns regardless of human busyness and technological distraction. The 10th and final foundation of Jungian happiness involves what he called the development of genuine compassion, not just for others, but for all aspects of yourself, including your mistakes, limitations, struggles, and the parts of your personality that you find difficult or embarrassing, recognizing that self-acceptance and self-forgiveness are prerequisites for authentic love and effective service to others in the world. Jung discovered that much human suffering comes from internal warfare, the constant self-criticism, self-rejection, and self-punishment that people inflict on themselves for not being perfect, not meeting impossible standards, not transcending their human limitations and needs, creating an exhausting internal dynamic that drains energy from creative work, loving relationships, and meaningful contribution, while generating chronic stress and depression and anxiety that no external achievement or recognition can heal. True compassion, as Jung understood it, is not sentimental softness or permissive indulgence of harmful behaviors, but rather the kind of wise, strong love that sees clearly, accepts what is, and works skillfully toward what could be without rejecting or attacking what currently exists, whether in yourself or others, creating space for growth and change while maintaining basic respect and care for the struggling human being who is doing their imperfect best to navigate life's challenges and opportunities. This compassionate attitude toward yourself naturally extends to others because you recognized shared humanity, common struggles, universal needs for love, acceptance, understanding, and support that transcend superficial differences of personality, background, belief, or circumstance, allowing you to respond to difficult people and situations with patience and skill rather than reactive judgment or defensive withdrawal. Jung believed that the development of genuine compassion is both a natural result of psychological maturity and individuation, and also a conscious practice that accelerates your growth toward wholeness and authentic happiness by dissolving the artificial barriers between self and other, deserving and undeserving, acceptable and unacceptable,
that create separation, conflict, and the illusion that your well-being is independent of others' well-being. The practice of compassion involves developing what Jung called the loving eye, the ability to see yourself and others with the same kind of patient, accepting, encouraging perspective that a wise, loving parent might have toward a child who is learning, growing, making mistakes, and gradually developing the skills and wisdom needed to navigate life successfully, recognizing that everyone, regardless of age or apparent competence, is still learning, still growing, still deserving of basic kindness and support. This compassionate perspective doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior or avoiding necessary boundaries and consequences, but rather approaching difficult situations from a foundation of care rather than judgment, seeking to understand rather than to condemn, working towards solutions that serve everyone's legitimate needs, rather than punishing those who have made mistakes or fallen short of expectations. Jung discovered that people who cultivate genuine compassion often experience a profound sense of connection and purpose that enhances their own happiness while contributing to the healing and growth of their families, communities, and the broader human family. Because compassion creates positive ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate recipients of your kindness and understanding. The integration of all these foundations creates what Jung called the individuated life. Not a perfect existence free from difficulty and challenge, but rather a conscious, authentic, meaningful way of being that aligns your outer life with your inner nature, your daily choices with your deepest values, your individual development with your service to the collective good, generating the kind of sustainable happiness that doesn't depend on external circumstances remaining constant, but emerges from your own psychological wholeness, spiritual depth, and creative engagement with whatever life presents. This Jungian approach to happiness is fundamentally different from conventional self-help approaches because it doesn't promise easy answers, quick fixes, or permanent solutions to life's inherent challenges, but rather offers a path of lifelong growth and development that transforms difficulties into opportunities for increased consciousness, deeper wisdom, and expanded capacity for love, creativity, and meaningful contribution to the ongoing human experiment in conscious evolution. The happiness that emerges from this path is not the shallow pleasure of getting what you want or avoiding what you fear, but the profound satisfaction of becoming who you really are, of living authentically from your own center while serving something greater than your ego's immediate desires, of contributing your unique gifts to the world while continuing to grow in wisdom, compassion, and creative capacity throughout your entire lifetime. Jung's final insight about happiness is perhaps his most important, that it's not a destination to be reached or a problem to be solved, but rather a way of traveling, a quality of engagement with life that emerges when you align your conscious choices with your unconscious wisdom, when you integrate all aspects of your personality into a dynamic whole, when you serve your individual development in service of collective healing, and when you approach each day as an opportunity to express more love, create more beauty, and contribute more wisdom to the great conversation of human experience that has been unfolding for thousands of years and will continue long after your individual contribution has been made.